Now is the time, folks. If you want to expand your garden space or start a brand new garden for next spring, fall is the best time to start. Now, I realize everyone has their own unique gardening style and, more importantly, their own soil types, but I'm going to show you today the primary ways that I start new beds in the fall in my Ohio gardens on predominantly clay-based soil. Method 1, direct in ground. Now, the first method, or direct in-ground beds, can be as cut and dry as killing off lawn, digging or tilling, and planting. But unless you are blessed enough to have beautiful, loamy, organic-rich soil, most of our soils are going to benefit from a little extra TLC. In my own heavy clay-based soil, these are the steps that I take. When creating a new bed, I first solarize or smother existing grass and weeds. To do this, I either use clear plastic or tarps. This works best when the sun is still hot and high, typically in the middle of the summer, but it will work in the fall as well. It just takes a little extra time. Alternately, I will smother off grass and weeds using things like cardboard or natural mulches, or I let the chickens do the work of killing off grass and weeds for me. More on that in method 2. Once all of my grass and weeds are killed off, I prefer to open up and aerate the soil a bit using either a garden fork or a broad fork. This helps to aerate the soil while minimizing soil disruption. However, there are some spots here that the soil is so heavy that the fork just does not cut it the first time out. So in particularly compacted areas, I will break up that soil with a spade or do a one-time tillage. Next, my focus is on the addition of organic matter. Now, my favorite thing to add in the fall is animal manure, and I will pretty much use any ruminant or chicken manure that I can get my hands on, as long as those animals have not been fed from any pasture or hay that's been treated with persistent herbicides. We raise a lot of chickens, so I end up using a lot of their bedding and manure on my beds, or often use cow or horse manure. Now, I like manure a lot because not only does it help to feed the soil microbes, I find that it helps to loosen up my clay soil, and many manures are an excellent source of nitrogen for my garden plants once they have composted. But if you don't have access to, or just prefer not to use manure for whatever reason, you can use pretty much whatever organic matter you have on hand. Compost is an excellent addition in the fall. Leaf mold, grass clippings, composted wood chips, all of these things will help improve your soil in the long run. Now, once I get my manure or other organic matter added to my new beds, I finish them off for the fall one of two ways. The first is to plant and cover crop, and my go-to cool season crops include things like vetch, oats, winter peas, rye, and radishes. And those will either winter kill in the case of the radishes, or I'll come in the next spring and chop them down prior to planting my garden, or I will just mulch the entire new bed in a natural mulch. Now, in the fall, my go-to is most often chopped up leaves. But again, hay, straw, grass clippings, all of those things will work as well. And I like these because they will start to rot down and add to the soil through the winter. They also help to prevent topsoil erosion during a time of year when the soil is often bare, and that winter and early spring precipitation can cause topsoil runoff. Now, depending on what type of mulch I use and how heavy I have mulched, sometimes in the early spring, if we're having a particularly wet spring, I will come through my beds and kind of push all of that mulch off of the top of the beds to allow them to dry out more quickly. Otherwise, when I'm ready to plant, I'll just scoop my mulch out of the way and either plant my line of seeds or plant directly in with seedlings. Now, a final optional step while forming beds is to raise up the planting area a little bit. Now, I prefer to do this with pretty much all of my planting areas. I'll raise up my beds or my rows just a few inches from the surrounding areas. And it works really, really well to do this in the fall so that this is ready to go in the spring. This helps in a couple of ways. It's going to help my beds dry out more quickly in the spring, and it's also going to help mitigate some of the drainage problems I have in my clay soil as I'm working through that process of improving the overall soil structure. Method 2, chicken prep. Now, I have talked about this method before. Be sure to check out the video linked above where I show the bed that I created this spring with the help of my chickens. But I feel like if you have chickens and you're not letting them help you out in the garden, you are missing out. This is so simple and easy. I just fence my flock in, or part of my flock in, wherever I need a new bed or need an old bed revamped, and let them do their chickeny thing. They scratch, they poop, they kill off weeds and grass, they eat bugs. And when I'm ready to finish the bed off, I simply move them to another location. The nice thing about this is it can be done on any scale. I've got the largest portion of my flock fenced up in this big new bed area behind me that I will eventually be using for larger scale crops. So something like corn or spreading things like pumpkins or winter squash. They've already got an excellent start on killing off all the grass and weeds in here and adding plenty of nitrogen-rich fertilizer. After I move them out, I'll let this rest for a few weeks prior to planting a winter rye cover crop. I may or may not fork the soil depending on how compacted it feels. Now, chicken manure is quite hot and will burn up plants, but I've had good luck planting rye as long as I let this area sit and rest for a while first. Late next spring, I'll terminate my rye and my bed is ready for planting. Now, not everyone has 40 chickens running around or even want to deal with a plot this big, but the nice thing is, if you have just a few members of your backyard flock, you can do exactly the same thing on a very small scale. Fencing them in will work just fine, but if you have a small chicken tractor or a mobile coop, this works really, really well because you can just basically easily maneuver and move them to wherever you need their assistance. I'm doing this by using the 𝐎𝐦𝐥𝐿 coop. This coop is lightweight and maneuverable enough that I can position my ladies right where I need them to work on expanding this garden bed outward. I leave them on one patch of grass for a few days. That's really all the time it takes, and then move the whole coop to the next spot, expanding the area to the size I want. This coop has pop-up wheels that I engage when I want to move the coop and put them down when I've got the coop where I want it. Plus, this whole thing is really sturdy with a fully enclosed attached run, so I can have my hens out in the open working on these garden beds without fear of them being snatched up by predators. In particular, hawks, as that's our #1 offender here. I can work in patches or wait till my birds have worked over the entire space I have in mind. But my process is exactly the same as it is for the large scale beds. And for anyone interested in your own 𝐎𝐦𝐿 coop, click on the link in the video description below and use the code Jenna10 for 10% off your order at 𝐻𝐦𝐿 anytime until November 27th, 2022. Method 3, Hugelkultur. Now, I'll admit, I'm a total Hugel convert since putting my first Hugelkultur bed in 3 years ago. It's a beautiful solution for my particular growing area because it helps mitigate some of those clay soil issues I've mentioned, as well as using up a lot of natural materials that I have on hand anyway, as we live on a semi-wooded property. Now, fall is a fantastic time to add a Hugelkultur bed, or 7, because it allows time for all of this material to kind of shift and settle and some of that breakdown of the materials to begin. Now, if you're new to Hugelkultur, be sure to check out my videos on how I built and planted my Hugelkultur beds, but the general concept is this. I dig a trench, pile in larger wood and logs, then pile in smaller materials like sticks, leaves, straw, and grass clippings, and then cover the pile back up with the dirt I removed when I dug the trench. Bonus points if you cover the whole thing in a layer of compost before piling the dirt back on top. The key thing to keep in mind with Hugel beds is that all of that woody material ties up nitrogen as it breaks down. So my preference is to start with aged logs and wood that have already started to decompose if possible, and to supplement with a fertilizer or natural material like manure, which is high in nitrogen the first couple of years. If you're starting with fresh logs, I definitely recommend waiting a season or 2 before planting and opting for some type of high nitrogen starter to help hasten that decomposition process. I've opted for things like manure, compost, and blood meal with good results, and have heard from other folks that urine works well also. And method 4, raised bed. Now, the raised beds may be the one caveat to the starting in the fall is best rule. One could certainly build and fill raised beds in the fall, but if you're planning on bringing in fill dirt or prepackaged soil, there's not a super compelling reason to do it in the fall, unless you just want those beds prepped and ready to go super early in the spring. But if you are planning on raised beds, I'd ask you to consider the option of creating a mini or micro hugelkultur bed. When opting for this method, fall would be the ideal time to start. Simply frame in your beds. Just be sure to position your beds on soil or lawn rather than something like landscape fabric or gravel in this system. And then fill your beds in the same way that you would fill the trench. So starting with slightly larger woody material on the bottom, smaller sticks, and then other organic materials like grass clippings, straw, hay, compost, and finally topping it all off with soil. So let me hear from you. Who is creating or revamping garden beds this fall, and what is your preferred method? Drop a line in the comments below and let me know. And if you enjoyed today's video, please consider subscribing to my channel, Growfully with Jenna. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.